the Oceania International Championships in the past, and we are going to have a very nice matchup here. It's Mew, it's Lost Zone Box, and at least for the next hour, we have no time or care for Lugia.
Yeah, no Lugia for this match at the minimum. I'm really excited to see this. I'm excited to look at Pedro's deck. He's chosen to play some interesting cards in his list. He's got the Zamazenta, he's got the Sky Sealstone, so there's a lot going on. As we know that the Lost Zone decks can be so flexible, can do so many different things. Looking at these prizes, though, 2 Colress's Experiment in there for Pedro. That is something that can definitely be tough to navigate.
And 2 of the free water energy, which means Radiant Greninja actually can't attack at the moment.
Yeah.
Because it needs 2 water energy, and 2 of the 3 are in the discard pile. Probably not huge in this particular matchup, but it's still something to watch. And it does look like we are heading down, and it looks like we are ready to go, and it looks like... Are we starting on Pedro here?
It looks
like Pedro is going to start off with a Comfey in the active, and that is exactly what you want if you're one of these Lost Zone players.
You play 4 copies of this card because it is not only vital to your deck's strategy, but because you also want to start with this Pokemon. You want it to be the highest odds Pokemon that you're going to see in that opening hand that you can put into the active so that you can do exactly this, kick off the turn with a flower selecting if need be.
Yeah, so much of this deck unlocks when you have a certain amount of cards in the Lost Zone. 4, and you can attack for free with Cramorant. 7, and you can use Mirage Gate, that item card, to accelerate energy. 10, and you can drop 12 damage counters with Saberlight. So those key numbers of cards in the Lost Zone. So starting off flower selecting turn 1 is good, and it looks like we've got to capture energy. Are we going to go for a second Comfey here? Possibly not, because there's already 1 in hand.
Yeah, I would love to see this grab out that Radiant Greninja. That's such a key card for this deck, being able to ditch energy cards with the concealed cards, just adding more to your hand. And that's what this Lost Zone deck is all about. The way Pedro has built his list especially as well, you just have tons of options. And the way you access those options is with all of your many different powerful trainer cards. And the way you have all those trainer cards is by building up a large hand size. So Comfey, Colress's Experiment, and Radiant Greninja all aid one another into increasing your own hand size.
Yeah, and you absolutely called it there, Chip. Went straight for the Radiant Greninja, and we saw Pedro there just poking a few cards to the top. You're counting prizes. Of course, you've got those 6 cards you put out at the beginning of the game that you don't have access to until you take knockouts, which means there's 6 cards you may want that are missing. So what the good players do, every time they do their first search of the deck, it's having a look and trying to see not necessarily every card that's in your prizes, but think about the matchup you're playing, which cards are going to be most important, double check, are any of the ones I'm really relying on prized?
Always good things to know and always good things to check. Pedro now has a couple of energies to choose to Lost Zone here, and that's also something Pedro was definitely keeping track of in these Lost Zone decks where you're playing 4 different types of basic energy. It is incredibly important to make sure you know exactly which ones you have access to and exactly which ones you don't, because those decisions all matter when you're having to discard them with concealed cards and also when you're potentially having to send them to the Lost Zone with flower selecting.
Absolutely. Only having 1 water energy left could be big in the future. Now, we do see the retreat into a second Comfey, and we got another flower selecting here. Sableye and Mirage Gate.
It feels like every decision with the Lost Box deck is a tough one, and Pedro had an okay decision on the first one, was fine losing the capture energy, but right away he's having to decide which one of these 2 cards is he okay losing. Mirage Gate's one of the most powerful cards in the deck, but he is choosing to lose it in favor of keeping the Sableye for later on in the game.
I think it's worth noting, does only play 1 Sableye in this deck.
Made that decision even harder almost.
Yeah, so essentially Lost Zoning it here says goodbye to it for the game, and even though, it's not taking giant KOs or anything like that, but dropping those 12 damage counters can be very big as you go through the game, and just cutting yourself off from that option turn 1 just feels quite bad. So we're over to Christian now. We've got a Genesect on the board. Oh, and a Battle VIP pass turn 1 is exactly what you're looking for. Searching out a couple of basic Pokemon. I feel confident there's going to be at least 1 more Genesect here, and then we're going to start drawing a whole mess of cards.
And the thing about Christian's deck, we're used to seeing more recently with these Mew builds that this turn 1 is pretty slow when you're going second. You go get down a couple Mew V, you retreat into your Oricorio, and you pass. That's not going to be the case here for Christian. Christian has Meloetta, and if he can find Alessa's Sparkle, can get some energy in play. We have a Fusion Strike energy already in the hand, actually, as well, so it's pretty reasonable that we're going to see a turn 1 Melodious Echo taking a knockout on this Comfey.
Yeah, I think that could absolutely be something we see here. Now, there is an Ultra Ball coming down as well, so there's more Pokemon still going to be coming here. And it's another Genesect. So yeah, that Fusion Strike system ability is just going to be coming out drawing. I mean, it lets you draw until you've got as many cards in hand as you've got Fusion Strike Pokemon on the field. So the goal here in a lot of matchups, get 6 Fusion Strike Pokemon out, and then you can potentially be drawing until you've got 6 cards in hand 4 times during your turn.
Yes.
That's potentially drawing 24 cards a turn, which is about the most powerful draw we've ever seen.
Yeah, I think it is up there when we consider the powerful draw abilities that have existed in the history of the game. Obviously, it doesn't work in every deck archetype, but the fact that Fusion Strike Mew is so powerful on its own, it makes it worthwhile, and it makes it just one of the strongest abilities we've ever seen, like you mentioned.
Yeah, it's one of those ones, the first time we saw it, we're like, oh, that's limited to once per turn. Oh, that's not limited to once per turn. Now, we do see that Forest Seal Stone coming down, and we got a Battle VIP pass as well. And this is, I mean, this is still turn 1, let's be clear.
Yes.
This is still turn 1. And one of the cool things that we can actually see, that Forest Seal Stone works on a Pokemon V, not necessarily just a V-Star. So it's one of the few situations you can have a turn 1 V-Star power.
Right.
Because usually they're on V-Stars, you've got to wait a turn to evolve.
And it's going to be really nice in this spot for Christian because he has now, through this Forest Sealstone, he will be able to guarantee Alessa Sparkle this turn. That means he'll be able to guarantee a turn 1 attack. Now, I expect we'll see some more cards drawn before that V-Star marker gets flipped over. Christian's going to draw some more, try to draw the Alessa Sparkle, and maybe try to even save the Star Alchemy V-Star power for later on in the game. But he's, by getting this down into play right now, guaranteed that he'll be able to pull off that play, whether he draws it or not off of this Genesect Fusion Strike system.
And that's just such a good position to be in. When you know you've got a guaranteed out to it, but you've also got a chance to draw it without the guaranteed out and save that as a guaranteed out for something else in the future.
Yep.
It's just absolutely fantastic there. So we do see an Ultra Ball coming down. We're getting rid of a second Forest Seal Stone. You've got one. You're not going to need the other. Those V-Star powers are once during the game. So still nothing huge there. We got another couple of cards
Looking for
drawn.
that Alessa. See if he can hit it. And does find it off of that 6th final card.
Yeah, final card was the Alessa Sparkle there. And it looks like we're getting a Fusion Strike Energy onto the Meloetta, another one onto the Mew, and we're going to be seeing an attack here, which, I mean, to put it bluntly, is going to easily do enough to KO a Comfey here.
Yeah, plenty of damage. 210 being dished out by Christian here on this first turn of the game. Now, he could have chosen to actually use Psychic Leap with a Mew, could have attached the Fusion Strike from hand, Fusion Strike Energy, excuse me, from hand to the Mew, gone for the Psychic Leap, and maybe shuffled the Mew back, maybe promoted a Genesect, maybe just gone in and left the Mew and said, okay, I don't think Pedro's going to be able to get the knockout on it. Even though he's dealing 210 damage, it's a bit of an overshot here on this Meloetta. It's still worth attacking with the one prizer.
Yeah, it absolutely is. You are, unfortunately, almost certainly going to be giving it up to a Cramorant next turn, and that means you're going to be losing the Fusion Strike Energy. But it means you've kicked off the prize race, you've taken your first prize, you've not put your Mew in harm's way, and you haven't even got a VMAX out, so Drapion absolutely not going to be an issue, at least for this turn. So now it's over to Pedro. And, I mean, there's going to be other things going on, but I think the priority here, get a couple of cards in the Lost Zone, and then that Cramorant is going to be able to attack for free and then get a nice cheeky KO.
Yeah, it's an interesting setup here for Pedro. He's got a few ways he wants to play that. I mean, we talked about playing around Roxanne and playing it to a point of just using the Sky Seal Stone. The question for me is going to be how heavily does he want to rely on the Sky Seal Stone? Does he just leave it as kind of an option? Because he's got a few paths he can go here. He can use Cramorant to knock out this Meloetta, and then, try to maybe KO a Genesect on the bench with something like a Snorlax and a Choice Belt, and then close out the game with a Drapion to take those final 3 prizes. Or if he can find a way to take a 2-prize KO or just maybe KO 2 1-prize Pokemon, he can then move into going with that Sky Seal Stone to close out the game.
Yeah, it certainly seems like this Lost Zone deck is built to beat Mew far more than Mew is built to beat Lost Zone. So it's very much Mew is having a kind of adapt and learn to play around this new style, whereas these Lost Zone decks, you've got things like the Sky Seal Stone and the Drapion, and here we see the Chorus's Experiment coming down. That is going to be big. That's going to put 5 cards total in the Lost Zone, and it's going to mean that you've got access to 3 more cards, one of which is actually the Cramorant if you want it there, but there's also another Comfey, and it seems like, yes, we've got Comfey and Battle VIP Pass going into the Lost Zone. Battle VIP Pass being a very easy choice, because it is literally useless now. And then we've got extra cards. And look how many cards are in Pedro's hand. There's
This
options.
is exactly what we were talking about. This deck has so many different cards in it that are useful in so many different situations. And the way it has access to them is by building up a large hand size. Pedro's been able to achieve that here as we are just sitting on turn number 2. It's pretty amazing to see.
Yeah, so a lot of decks are relying on Marnie, which shuffles your hand and puts it on the bottom of your deck, or Professor's Research, which discards your hand. But what this Lost Zone deck does is it just keeps building your hand size. Comfy gives you a card. Chorus's Experiment gives you 3 cards. You're constantly building up your hand size rather than essentially swapping cards for other cards. And that does give you a lot of options going through. And we do see the retreat with the Comfy here, and it just looks like Cramorant is going to attack into that Meloetta and get a very easy KO with a very weirdly named Spit Innocently.
Yeah, Cramorant may feel like it's being innocent, but I think it's pretty rude to be spitting on this Meloetta,
That's
as it will be taking 2 energies out of play as well for Christian. I'm sure he's not a fan either.
No, and a card we do not see very much at all, that Zamazenta. It is a tech, it's not one we're unfamiliar with, but it's not one we've seen a huge amount of.
Yep.
But it's got a nice retaliation attack, and it's got a little bit of bulk there. So you can see why players would choose to include it, especially in these builds with Mirage Gate, where you can accelerate the energy and get it going very quickly.
It could be a great way for Pedro on the next turn to try to get a 2-prize KO on something on the bench. If he can combine a Mirage Gate with a metal attachment and even an escape rope, maybe if Christian does not find a double VMAX, then that would lead to 2 prizes taken for Pedro next turn. So I love putting it in play. And yeah, like we mentioned at the start, it's not too often we see much disruption from these Meloetta builds of the Fusion Strike deck, but Christian is playing 1 Roxanne and 1 Marnie. Those are all things that could come up.
Absolutely. Now, we do see a boss's orders coming down, bringing that Luminion into the active, so clearly going after the 2-prize turn. One of the issues here, of course, there's no real Meloetta threat on the board, so it does look like we are going to be seeing a Mew V Max attack here. And then we've got potential Drapion shenanigans, but first, there's a Cramomatic.
Cramomatic spins the wheel, flips a Tails, nothing yielded in this spot. Did get rid of an Ultra Ball, which can be a nice way to thin the hand size down. Christian's hand may be a little awkward, and that's something that'll happen with these Mew builds from time to time. You just have a little bit of a clunky hand that you can't really efficiently thin down. Quick Ball, though, can ditch a Power Tablet, normally a pretty powerful card, but in this matchup where all of Pedro's Pokemon have such low hit points, it's not going to be super relevant.
No, and it can be nice to have these cards like Battle VIP Pass after turn 1 and, you know, just to be able to get rid of them without any real issue. Because Power Tablet, like you say, you're not going to need those damage modifiers. You are easily doing enough to KO anything in Pedro's deck at this stage. So it's really just about trying to set up and trying to avoid, I mean, getting a second Meloetta would be good. The issue you've got is that there's a Fusion Strike energy on the Mew. So if you tried to get another Meloetta, you'd have to get the second Fusion Strike energy down, but then another energy on the Meloetta. The energy doesn't really work at this stage of the game to get that second Meloetta going. So we do just see a Mew getting searched.
Yeah, the only reason you'd put it down is if you wanted to use that Cross Fusion Strike attack in order to copy the Meloetta's attack as an option, but it looks like for now in this spot, Christian's going to evolve the bench, and it looks like we're fishing for a double turbo energy here, I imagine.
Does not look like we find it, unfortunately. There is an echoing horn, but there isn't any kind of energy at all there, unfortunately. So that is disappointing. We see a quick ball here, presumably to get a nothing. Yeah, just thinning out the hand. There's no bench space left. And then what have we got? A Rotom phone letting you rearrange and try and stack the top card of your deck, trying to guarantee that you get what you want. But is there even an obvious choice there?
Not really. There's nothing that you slam dunk want to take. I think you definitely would grab a VMAX right away, or an Ultra Ball, or even that double turbo energy being the main thing. But looks like our options are things like Power Tablet, Lost City, Switch as well. So I think the Switch is the card that was eyed up here for Christian. Can just burn that and switch into another Mew that has free retreat. Just get a card out of the deck so that you can, keep trying to draw with these Fusion Strike systems.
Yeah, and sometimes thinning out is the best you can do. Of course, we've got those Genesect drawing a bunch of cards here, and that's why Rotom Phone gets played, because you look at the top 5 cards of your deck, leave one card on the top, and then you can draw it with your Genesect. It's a wonderful combo, but sometimes you look at the top 5 cards of your deck and you don't have the one you want. But here we do have a double turbo energy, and the Mew and the Active's got free retreat, so this is starting to work out very nicely indeed.
And still gets one more card draw here with the Fusion Strike system of the Genesect. Doesn't look like there's anything else to thin out of the hand, so just one more card plus 1 is pretty good still. and it will be a retreat. Now, Christian was unable to find a second VMAX, so Pedro could line up for an escape rope retaliate play this turn if he wants it.
Yeah, that would be an all nice play. I mean, that's why you played as Zamazenta. So we do see the KO on the Luminion, and Christian Tuomi here does go down to 3 prizes remaining, which is lovely.
And Pedro has top decked the escape rope,
so
that is
helps.
one piece of the puzzle already achieved for him.
And you said a minute ago, if there's no double VMAX, there is no double VMAX, which means everything on Christian's side of the board is going to be in range of that Zamazenta. We still do need an energy and a Mirage Gate in order to pull it off. We've got at least the energy.
And does need a couple more cards in the Lost Zone still as well, but Colress's Experiment is already in this hand. I mean, look at the size of this hand here for Pedro.
No, oh, yes, I'm looking at the discard pile, not the Lost Zone. You're right, there's only 5 there at the moment, but Chorus's Experiment, and this is perfect.
Yes.
Firstly, it puts your Lost Zone up to 7.
Yep.
Secondly, it gives you a good chance to find the other cards you're looking for.
Yeah, don't want to find too many energies, and that could be an issue here, as Pedro has found a couple off of this Colress. Will have to send 1 to the Lost Zone. It is that final water energy, as we remember 2 are in the prizes. Pedro may have to just play an ordinary rod here if he wants to get the necessary energy, as there is a metal and a lightning in the discard pile that he could utilize Mirage Gate with.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, Drapion is still an option here to potentially take out the Mew. That's always an option. Any deck that's playing Drapion, and there are a bunch of them. Sometimes you're working on this big combo and you're like, oh, you know what? Let's just use Drapion instead. Let's just go for that. The thing is, that's nice to be saving for kind of your last KO. It's nice, your last KO is often when it's later in the game, when you've exhausted a few resources, where just being able to drop a basic Pokemon is going to be easier. This is a point in the game where you can dig a bit more and get those combos going, so it's one of those, you can use Drapion, but I'd rather get the Zamazenta KO if that's a possibility.
Pedro going to put a couple of cards back with the Ordinary Rod now, and something he does need to worry about is that by taking a 2-prize knockout here, I think it's his best play. I think it's what he needs to do, but he is in danger of being hit with the Rock Sand, being put to just 3 cards, and that is something that is tough for these Lost Box decks, because while they love to build up large hand sizes to have lots of options, that's a lot of cards going back in, and when you've only got 2 cards in your hand to work with, it's generally not going to be enough to piece together a KO. So what he'll be doing here is he'll be taking this knockout with the Zamazenta, he'll go down to 3 prizes and thin as much as possible so that he only needs to find a Drapion or a Quick Ball or a Switch in order to get it into the active, making it as likely as possible that off of just 2 cards he'll be able to find the game-winning card.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why the Zamazenta goes first, and you make an excellent point there, Chip, and it seems to be working. We've got a couple energy on the Zamazenta here. And, I mean, we've seen the escape rope should already be in hand. I'm sure there's a metal energy in hand as well. So we are going to see a flower selecting first, getting rid of a switch cart. That's something that's not necessarily needed now, so that's quite nice. And we do actually have the Drapion in hand, so there will need to be some hand disruption from Christian here, who really is not going to have much of a choice but to Mew VMAX next turn. But here does come that escape rope. And, I mean, I suppose you put Mew up here?
Yeah, I think you want to lose the Mew because you've already got another one backed up on the bench with an energy, and you really want to keep your Genesects all around.
Yeah, it is the right choice. It's just, it always feels bad when you're just kind of putting that Mew active knowing you're giving up 2
Whenever
prizes.
you're the one having to choose which of your Pokemon to sacrifice to this poor Zamazenta, yeah, it never feels great. But it is what the correct play is here for Christian. Does send up the Mew, and Pedro does have that metal energy in hand lined up. Now the question is, does Pedro thin cards out of his hand with this Quick Ball? And it's kind of a tough spot to be in because, sure, Quick Ball discards cards for you, but if you get Roxanne and draw the Quick Ball, that gets you the Drapion, right?
Yeah, you do want to be thinning, but you don't want to be getting rid of your Quick Ball. Decides not to, just takes a KO on the Mew with the Zamazenta, goes down to 3 prizes remaining, and from here it's quite simple. Pedro needs to use a Drapion to KO the Mew VMAX, which is obviously now in play, and Christian needs to take a few KOs with Disruption, and Disruption is going to be the key. Christian can see Pedro's hand. The chances of Pedro not having the out here is very, very, very small. So if Christian just KOs, goes down to 2 prizes, almost certainly going to lose the game. We know he will, but from Christian's standpoint, almost certainly going to lose. So you need a little bit of disruption here just to try and slow it down.
It's got to be the Roxanne for sure, and I think Christian would also love to find Path to the Peak to put it in play. Path to the Peak, of course, does shut off the wild style ability of the Drapion, which is what allows the Drapion to attack for no energy. So if Christian can combine a Path to the Peak with the Roxanne, it's going to be very difficult for Pedro to find the response KO to close out the game.
And this is what we see. These Mew decks weren't playing so much Disruption a few months ago.
Right.
But now there's so many targets there. There's so many people specifically going after that deck, trying to play all of these counters. That this is what we're talking about with the Mew adapting. And this is part of the adaptation here. And we actually see a Marnie being dropped because you said yourself it has to be Roxanne.
Yeah.
Marnie's not good enough. Let's go. And it seems like it's a Meloetta, but this is clearly just a thinning out play.
So Christian actually has the Path to the Peak in his hand already. So it's an interesting choice, right? You play the Roxanne, put the Path back into play, and then use your Genesect, try to draw it, or do you just slam the Path now, then play Roxanne, knowing that you're not going to be able to use any of your Genesect abilities at all?
I mean, yeah, they're neither of those are ideal, honestly. Of course,
Right.
Path to the Peak has long been one of the best counters against Mew because it shuts down Genesect. But it does, I do think this is the right play here. As much as it makes me a little bit uncomfortable, you need the Path, you need the Roxanne. Let's not muck about. Because the fact of the matter is, if your opponent draws out of this, you're going to lose anyway. So you might as well just go, I've got Mew, I hope this stays around a bit.
And you can see how this strategy would be so good for Pedro if he was playing up against the more traditional builds of Mew these days, right? Just the double turbo builds with no Meloetta. But because Pedro had to take the knockout on the Meloetta, wanted to deal with that potential threat, it then opened up the opportunity for Christian to play Roxanne at this point because Pedro went to 3 prizes, whereas otherwise he'd be able to play around that thanks to Sky Seal Stone. It's just not an option, and he only has 2 cards to work with now.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, what is this draw? He drew Drapion and Chorus's Experiment. What?
That is about as good as you can possibly draw off a Roxanne. Yeah, if I'm Pedro and I see those 2 cards, I'm like, oh, sweet, I still get to win.
He just needs to find a bump of the path now or a way to get 4 energy on the Drapion, and he can close it out.
Yeah, it's not, let's be clear, it is not a guaranteed win by any stretch, but you've got the Chorus's Experiment, and you've even got a Comfey you can put active, and you've got Raiding Greninja to potentially draw if you bump the path first.
Right, sure.
So I think we're going to be in a decent position here. It's not a win yet, but it's getting pretty close.
The game-winning card now for Pedro is his 1 copy of Training Court, because if he just promotes Comfey and, uses Flower Selecting, uses Chorus's Experiment, and is able to find the Training Court, that gets him the energy out of the discard pile he needs in order to retreat his active Pokemon, and it also will, of course, bump the path so that Drapion's Wild Style is active.
Absolutely. Now, you will notice that while that turn was going on, Christian did get a second Mew VMAX, so he can retreat and keep attacking. Here is your top deck for the turn.
It's that Sky Seal Stone. That's not going to be super helpful here.
No, so it's going to be, it's Flower Selecting and it's Chorus's Experiment. People would love to argue online about what the correct order to do these 2 in is. Either way, you're going to be seeing the top 7 cards of your deck.
Well, I think in this instance, you want to go for the Comfey first because you could find the Raihan, which is exactly what Pedro's able to do, and that is going to be the game-winning card. As long as he has access to the Training Court, he's thinking about it still. Is that Training Court still available to him?
I don't know. We're playing the right hand now. We see the energy go on the Comfey. That gives you the pivoting option. Now you get to search your deck for any 1 card, which is hopefully going to be a card which bumps it. There is the Training Court. So that will wrap up game 1 for Pedro. Play the Training Court, get rid of the Path to the Peak, bench the Drapion, retreat the Comfey, and then Drapion doing what Drapion was designed to do, KOing the Mew and giving Pedro a game 1 win.
Yes, excellently played from Pedro. And you mentioned that Chorus's Experiment versus Comfey turn. Generally, Chorus is the correct action first, but for Pedro, it mattered so much in this instance that he chose Comfey first because he could have found Raihan to just win him the game immediately. Excellently navigated by Pedro, and he finds a way to win game 1 after getting Roxanne to 2 and finding the Drapion. Wow.
Yeah, that was pretty gosh darn good. As soon as you see the Drapion and the Chorus's Experiment, you know you're basically just looking for that Training Court. And like you said, being able to hit the right hand off of that Comfey was absolutely amazing. That was really good. And I like this. We're seeing a lot of back and forth games on stream today. We saw it with Lugia against Lost Box. We're now seeing it with Mew against Lost Box. And there were a lot of mistakes that could have been made there. Pedro won that game, partly because of the list he was playing and partly because of how well he played there. There were several turns where a different different decision could have changed things, but that didn't happen here, and Pedro navigated that absolutely beautifully.
Yeah, very well played, without a doubt. Christian made some great decisions as well in that game. I don't think he necessarily did anything wrong, but Pedro's deck just kind of functioned for him properly. He was able to find... I mean, I think when you Roxanne Path your opponent, you hope they don't have a combo of cards that's that good.
I think that's absolutely
fair.
I
mean, Pedro could have just as easily drawn Battle VIP Pass and a basic energy card and then just flower selecting into 2 more energies and just done nothing that turn, right?
Oh yeah, there are plenty of scenarios there where Christian does that, and that is absolutely what takes him to the win. Unfortunately, it was not the way this one ended up here. So we do end up going to a game 2 with Pedro Eugenio Torres up 1-0, and we saw there this is not a one-sided game. Mew's not... I've been saying this all day. Mew's confusing me because there's so many obvious counters. It's got such a target on its back, and yet it keeps winning. We saw it on stream, I believe, at 4-0, and it fell. We're now seeing it on stream at 5-0-1 in round 7, and it's gone down 1 game, but that could so easily have gone the other way. So it does look like we are shuffled up now. Prizes are being put out, and we are very, very close to game 2. A Mew VMAX Double Turbo, Forest Seal Stone.
None of those are great cards to see in the prizes, but they're at least not in multiples. We do see for Pedro, though, that Drapion is in the prizes.
Oh.
One of the lower prizes, though, so pretty reasonable he will find it. And there is a couple of Lightning Energy in the prizes as well. That can be really important for Mirage Gates later on. And yeah, is he only playing the 2 copies of Lightning?
He's only playing 2 Lightning, and similarly, one of the 2 Elisa Sparkle is prized, one of the 2 Forest Seal Stone is prized. So they're still in the deck for Christian, but they are going to be much more difficult to find. And here we go, we've got a Raikou V on Pedro's side of the board, and Christian starting off with double Genesect.
And it's actually really bad for Pedro that he's prized 2 Lightning Energies, because Raikou V can be a solid attacker in this matchup. It's one of the ways you can play around Roxanne. You get a Lightning Energy and another energy on your Raikou, and then you Boss's Orders KO a Genesect, and then all of a sudden you can just look for the Drapion Skyseal Stone play to close out the game, never worrying about Roxanne at all. Not going to be an option here for Pedro, as there are 2 Lightning in his discard, or in his prizes, excuse me.
Yeah, and he only plays 2. Raikou, of course, does an extra 20 damage for each bench Pokemon, yours and your opponent's. It's kind of fun against Mew, because Mew pretty much likes to have a full bench all the time.
Exactly.
So you can get, you know, if you've got a full bench and they've got a full bench, you do 220. You can have 1 bench space, you know, between you here, and you'll still do 200 and get the Genesect. So it is a very competent attacker if you don't have the Lightning prize. But this is one of the things we see from these Lost Zone decks. They tend to play, you know, the energy line here, we've got 2 Psychic, 3 Water, 2 Lightning, 3 Metal. That means that you are going out, and we've seen it 2 out of 2 games for Pedro here. You're going to have games where you've got really awkward energy prizes that really limit your choices.
Christian's having a pretty solid setup here, does Quick Ball, and it looks like Ultra Ball is going to be the other card in hand, and does ditch Alessa Sparkle, by the way. 1 in the prizes, 1 in the discard pile now. That means there is not going to be an option to get a bunch of extra Fusion Strike energy into play.
And Christian hasn't done a deck search yet, or hadn't before. Or had he played a Quick Ball?
He had played the Quick Ball,
Okay,
yeah.
so he must have known, or at least if he's done his deck search properly, he will have known that at least Sparkle is out. Essentially just deciding that with the cards in hand, Meloetta's not happening here. Now, we do see a Battle VIP pass. It'll be interesting to see what we go for here, because presumably you can't go Meloetta here.
You can go Meloetta, but you just can't attack with it. You have to attack with the Mew using it, right? So, which can be an option, right? You can still Melodious Echo for decent damage, but Christian has thought better of it and is just going with the couple of Mews to fill up this bench.
Yeah, I think without a lesser Sparkle, though, you're just not getting the Fusion Strike energy on board quick enough for even Mew to kind of copy it and do much good. So it does seem like we're just going full into Mew here. This is going to be a very Mew-centric game. So I suppose now we're just going to draw a bunch of cards with Genesect and hope we can set up the board a little bit better.
Yeah, going to be using that Cross Fusion Strike, copying Technoblast, maybe copying Max Miracle from a benched Mew, or if Christian's able to just get 2 Fusion Strike energy, can just use the Max Miracle on his active Mew as well. Doesn't even need to Cross Fusion Strike to get any copying going on.
Yeah, and that is the turn for Christian. That's all we've got. We've got an energy on the Mew. We've got pretty much the setup you want. Free Mew, free Genesect, or at least with, you know, with what's available to set up he wants. So now we're over to Pedro, and the good news is, looks like 2 Battle VIP pass in turn. So Pedro's going to have whatever basics he's looking for here.
Yeah, Pedro's hand is pretty stacked. He's also got a Comfey in the hand. He's also got Scoop Up Net, Escape Rope, Switch Cart, and a Chorus's Experiment as well. Pedro's got the world at his fingertips at this point. He can do so much this turn, and honestly, he's in a position where with that many Switch Cards with the Chorus as well, he could feasibly reach for a turn 1 Mirage Gate play. It's a lot to get. It is, however, possible. But, you know, with a couple of Lightnings prized, it means Raiko's not going to be a great attacker where otherwise it may.
And that's the problem here, because Pedro, you know, there's no switching needed, there's no gusting needed. Christian's gone and helpfully filled up his bench for Pedro. So Pedro just needs 4 bench Pokemon, 7 cards in the Lost Zone and a Mirage Gate, which is...
It's not, a bit, yeah.
It's a bit, but it's not inconceivable for a Lost Zone deck. But the problem is, and Pedro's searching his deck now, and Pedro's just finding out that is not an option. There is no lightning energy in the deck. So what would have been a nice attack to kind of strive for is now off the table, and any attack we're going to see here on turn 1 is probably going to just be a Cramorant.
More than likely could go for something like the Snorlax, potentially. If he found Snorlax in Choice Belt, it could knock out a Genesect this turn, or if he played Escape Rope and Christian offered up the Mew V, then Snorlax could come in and take a knockout. But, you know, this is all theoretical and, of course, reliant on Pedro getting to 7 in the Lost Zone, which is not going to be super likely. Looks like Cramorant is, you know, maybe Pedro's being a little bit more feasible than the two of us, just knowing Cramorant's going to be his best bet.
Yeah, and we do see the search in there, and this is about the point where Pedro realizes that he's got a lightning attacker in the active that would hit the numbers beautifully, which is not even on board, which means you've now got to find a pivot option and have a Pokemon on board, which for the moment can't really do anything. You can draw a card, which is quite nice. You've got that ability fleet-footed. If it's in the active, you get to draw a card. So it's not completely useless, but it is as an attacker. And we see the setup there exactly as we would expect. Too Comfey, Raining Greninja, Cramorant.
Pretty standard stuff when it comes to Lost Box. And then just in this instance, he started a starter that is less than ideal. Probably going to be seeing the fleet-footed here. I think this is probably the best time in the turn to go for it. Pedro seems to agree as he does get 1 more card to the hand. It is that Snorlax. Okay, hold on.
That's not bad. I mean, maybe that is the choice here. Again, it's a lot to ask for, but I kind of like the idea here. Keep Snorlax in hand. Let's play Chorus's Experiment.
Yes, it's around now. We'll see where the rest of the turn goes, but we're going to keep Snorlax in the back of the mind.
Yeah, but that's what the good players do. The good players have a few different options here. You can just attack with Cramorant, and you'll be there pretty quickly. But maybe there's a way you can stretch for the Snorlax. But let's not go too far. Let's just see kind of how viable it is. We've got Mirage Gate in hand here, so that could potentially be used. We need some pivot options to get into the Comfey, though, and at the moment, I'm not seeing any in hand.
Yeah, this is the Chorus, so he's getting rid of a couple cards there. He does have a few switching cards in hand, so I would have felt better about the turn 1 Mirage Gate chances if he had found a bunch of switch cards off of the Chorus. He didn't find any. There was no scoop-up nets or anything like that, so I think it's a little bit less likely. We're probably just seeing the Cramorant come out, so flower selecting going through. Pedro does see that Hisuian Heavy Ball, and he knows he's prized the Drapion, so he will lose that powerful Mirage Gate.
Yeah, and that's why knowing your prizes is so important, because now you've got an option to get that Drapion. Here is your Scoop Up Net, picks up a Comfey, and now we get to go for another one. Ooh, okay, so decides to keep the Capture Energy in hand and then Lost Zone the Capture Energy. I think that's definitely the right way around here. That's what I would have gone for.
The toughest decision Pedro's had to make all day. Now, that is 4 cards in the Lost Zone, so Cramorant is online.
Now we see the Hisuian Heavy Ball, and there's no surprise here what's going to be gone for. It's that Drapion. Probably not going to hit the bench yet. You don't want to put it down and put it in harm's way. What you absolutely do want to do is have it as an option. That's a big thing.
I wonder if there's ever a world where Pedro just goes in with the Drapion right here. Its wild style ability is making it so that you can attack for free with Dynamic Tail. So maybe you just go in and take the 1-hit KO onto this Genesect. It could be a play. You do open yourself up to getting that Drapion Lost City. So I don't expect Pedro to go for that because, you know, he probably is worried about the Lost City. But, you know, it's something, it's a play that's available, right?
I kind of like it. You are betting against Lost City. The good news is that these Lost Zone decks do play a whole bunch. You know, there's a couple of ordinary rods. You can get the Drapion back from the discard, but not from the Lost Zone.
Exactly.
So the real question is, do you think your opponent's going to be able to hit one of their 2 Lost City? But bearing in mind with all those Genesect Fusion Strike system, and we know that Forest Seal Stone is on board, or potentially on board. I know it's not actually sitting there now, so I don't think it's a risk you can take, because if a deck is going to find a card, Mew is going to find the card. Most of the time.
Most of the time. Oranguru does come down now with that capture energy that can prep a card on top of the deck for Pedro, playing around the one Marnie that Christian does play. It's such a strong card in these Lost Zone decks because, we've talked about how they want to build up a large hand, and Marnie's a great answer to that. So the Oranguru gives you a little bit of withstance against that Marnie play from your opponent.
Yeah, it's always nice to be able to stash a card and, have it there later when you need it. So we do have a bunch of abilities having been used so far, and it does look like, so here is your Oranguru ability. And, really from here, we know the Cramorant's there. We know the Cramorant's attacking. We got an energy on the Comfy ready to retreat. We got the Cramorant already on the bench. It's really whether Pedro can just set up a little bit more, try and get his board just that little bit more established. More cards in the Lost Zone would be good at this stage, but it doesn't look like we got much else going on this turn.
Yeah, I wonder if Pedro, it looks like he will just retreat into the Cramorant and attack, but you got to wonder how useful this damage is on this Genesect. We could have even seen him just retreat into a Comfey, use Flower Selecting once more to get +1 in the Lost Zone, but I guess what Pedro can do here by putting this damage onto the Genesect, it sets it up to be able to be cleaned up by a Sableye later on in the game. So he can clean it up with the Sableye and then go with the Drapion Sky Seal Stone.
Yeah, and that's really good. Your Sableye drops 12 damage counters anywhere on your opponent's board for 1 energy if you've got 10 cards in the Lost Zone. So here we're working on a 2-hit KO, but like you say, there's a 4-prize option here. So there is a world in which next turn Pedro gets a KO with Sableye, turn after that 4-prize KO, and that's the game. Probably not going to be quite that quick, but there is a world in which that happens. So Christian, we've got an escape rope, wants that Genesect out the active as fast as possible, and is going to be working on a KO. Preferably not, it's not going to be on the Cramorant. And if you're Pedro here, you can give up 2 prizes, or you can give up a useful support Pokemon.
Yeah, it's a tough call. You definitely don't want to give up Greninja. That's off the table. The question now becomes Oranguru or Comfey. And I don't think Raikou is a great option either, so it looks like Pedro will choose to lose the Oranguru, maybe thinking that, hey, in this Fusion Strike build of the deck, my opponent maybe doesn't play Marnie, but as soon as we say that, of course Christian's going to slam it down.
I just think the Oranguru is just giving you a bit less utility. Like you say, you can't get the Greninja, and especially when you've only got 4 cards in the Lost Zone, those Comfey have not done their job yet. You've not got everything you're looking for, so I do think you have to give the Oranguru here. I just don't really like it. But that's kind of the point of playing the escape rope. You're trying to make your opponent do something they don't like.
Exactly. That's why it's one of the reasons that it can be such a valuable switching card, as Christian will draw a couple more. We do see that Lost City, so you could throw it in play, Lost Zone, that Oranguru. I don't actually know that would be good in this spot, though, because you're adding a card to Pedro's Lost Zone. You're actually helping him out here, getting him closer to attacking with Sableye this turn.
Yeah, and it looks like it's just going to be discarded with Quick Ball. I kind of like saving the Lost City, but it really depends. Like, if that Drapion comes down early, you have to get it in the Lost Zone. It has to be gotten rid of as quickly as possible, and it has to end up in the Lost Zone. As the game wears on, it becomes a stage where Drapion is only ever going to get 1 shot. At which point, Lost City just becomes a lot less important because it's going to come down as a game ender.
Yeah, and that might be why Christian's thinking, hey, I can just lose it. I'm not going to get use out of it getting rid of a Drapion if my opponent is saving it for the end of the game.
Yeah, so we do see the Mew here attacking into the Oranguru, just getting a nice little KO there, taking a prize, and, getting Christian off the board. At least, well, on the board, I suppose, is more appropriate. Taking a prize, all right? Let's just say taking a prize.
Getting the prize off the board, though.
Yes!
It's in the hands. Yeah. It looks like it will be a Radiant Greninja start here for Pedro. Adding a couple cards to the hand. There is that Mirage Gate. Does need to find 3 more cards into the Lost Zone here. And this hand is not the best. I think he's kind of relying on this Flower Selecting, and that's a pretty tough call. The Training Court and the Raihan, both one-ofs in this deck. Training Court, of course, vital to bump that path to the peak, and Raihan would actually be decent right now to help you set up whatever you want.
I want the Training Court. I'm going to be honest with you, Chip. I want the Training Court. I want an option to bump that path to the peak. You're not playing a lot of stadiums. In fact, I'm only seeing 1 in the entire list. The Training Court does go in the Lost Zone. But what's that going to mean? Like, if Path to the Peak comes down, it's going to be a lot harder to deal with.
Pedro has no other supporter to play this turn, and I think that's what's led to this decision for him. He needs to play the Raihan, and this can maybe help him reach for a attack this turn. It is actually still kind of hard, though, as he needs to use 2 flower selectings. Colress's Experiment is no longer an option.
No, and that's the thing. The Chorus's Experiment this turn would have been absolutely beautiful. Put your Lost Zone up to 7, get a Pokemon rolling. And I'm not loving Pedro's setup this game. There's no real attacker on the board that I'm scared of if I'm Christian. It's taken far too long to get enough cards into the Lost Zone to really activate all those other attacks and abilities that you're looking for. And, you know, Pedro's still not taking a prize.
I think we're going to be seeing 4 taken right here, though. Pedro is setting up for the Sky Seal Stone play. Off his Raihan, put that card in hand, capture energy, now brings down the Drapion. He doesn't care about playing around Roxanne. He wants to take these 4 prize cards now. He knows with all that damage onto the Genesect, he can close out this game with either a Boss's Orders and a Cramorant. He can close out this game with a Mirage Gate onto this Greninja. He can close out this game with a Sableye later on. He wants to take the prizes now and put the ball in Christian's court to do something about it.
Yeah, and I like this play. It's not the way that you usually want to do it. This is usually your last 4 prizes, like you say, to get around that Roxanne play. But I was just saying that Pedro doesn't have much going on. There's no real attacker, etc. And this is kind of the turn where you go, look, there's not much going on. So here comes my Drapion. I'm going to use Sky Seal Stone. That's going to be my V-Star power for the turn. And I'm going to get 4 prizes off your Mew.
4 prizes taken. That dynamic tail hitting more than enough to KO the Darkness Weak Mew VMAX, and 6 damage being freely placed onto that Cramorant. Pedro does not mind that one bit. Christian's got to do something to respond to this play, though.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to get rid of the Drapion first of all. If you don't, you literally just lose the game next turn. So that's the big one. And then I think we're back to Disruption. I mean, it's probably going to be a Roxanne. You know, we've said Pedro is not able to play around the Roxanne because of that play. So I think it probably is just going to be Roxanne KO, and we do see the Ultra Ball coming down here. It's obviously going to be for the VMAX because there isn't one on the board at the moment. And then from there, it's just, can Christian do enough, or is there something else?
Christian has his 2nd Mew VMAX in the prizes, and in this build of the deck, he's only playing 2 Mew VMAX. The 2nd one is prized. Christian doesn't have a Mew VMAX. He can Psychic Leap?
And that's game. Christian concedes. Pedro takes a 2-0 win because of a prized Mew VMAX. And we've been saying all weekend about, you know, the build, all day I should say, about the builds and about people only playing 2 V-Stars or 2 VMAXs. This is why it's a risky play. We were in the middle of a really exciting game then, Chip. It was just getting good, and then it's over.
It's over, yep. The prize cards were not on Christian's side. Pedro Eugenio Torres wins the game 2-0, putting his unique Lost Box build on display for all of us to see. And with this win as well, Pedro has locked up a berth into day 2 of this event, getting to a 6-0-1 record.
Yeah, that is a day 2 player, and no stranger to day 2, and like we say, we're looking at a potential repeat champion. We've seen Stefan Ivanov win the North American International Championships twice, so why not having Pedro Eugenio Torres come down and win the Oceania International Championships twice? And, you know, my fellow Europeans, they're kind of representing here a little bit.
Absolutely. You know, you love to see it. Pedro is one of the best players in the game, and he's honestly just one of the kindest people in the community as well. If you ever get a chance to speak to him, he is just so down to earth and so in love with this game, in love with the community as well. He's really, truly just a great person, great guy to talk to as well. And I know this event means a lot to him, right? Boo and I talked about this at the top of the show. This is the tournament that really put him on the map. He had gotten top 8 at the European International Championships directly before this, but history remembers winners, right? You know, top 8 players are obviously incredible, but when it comes to who wins the tournament, nobody ever forgets it. And Pedro won the Oceania International Championships and was able to steamroll that from the position and just win tournament after tournament, won regional championships, and made top cut at multiple other ICs, and now finds himself 6-0-1, locking up a day 2 berth into the tournament that really does just mean so much to him.
Yeah, and here's the thing, you know, you get that decision. It's a decision a lot of people are talking about. You end up at 6-2. You're going into round 9. You can ID. You can choose to draw with your opponent, and then both you end up at 6-2-1, but you end up on the bottom end, and there's a real slog to get through into top 8. Pedro is in. If Pedro loses his next 2 games, he's in day 2. So now for Pedro, this is all just a bonus. Now, instead of trying to make day 2, it's, well, now every win today is really a win tomorrow.
Sure.
So now it's just getting closer and closer to, you know, that top 8 berth, because that's essentially, Pedro is already at that stage where fighting for a stage 2. None of this do I ID in round 9 nonsense. It is all about, let's get as many points as I can in day 1, because Pedro's heading for top 8, or at least aiming for top 8.
Yeah, he's